Welcome, everyone, to Coffee Break, the next episode of our MMO podcast. This is where we discuss everything to do with MMO gaming. A lot of us have been playing games for a very long time, and we just sort of, compare, contrast, discuss, and review basically everything about the MMO genre. So most of you guys that we've met in Azure. No, that's that makes me hate it even more, actually. Yeah, it's the
I need
the
to say
tentacles.
something. By the way, Soul, no point. What you tried earlier works now. Yep, I just
What?
added it.
What does that mean? If you wear an eye patch, you'd be a pirate mare. Okay, so for anyone who might have missed it, the first stream that we did down here in our new stream setup was 2 years ago in October. We did the pirate-themed Halloween stream. And I grew a goatee that was shorter than this. It was much less time invested so that I could be a pirate. And we actually had a pirate stream where everyone dressed up as a pirate in Guild Wars 2. We did pirate themed raids. Everyone had to speak like a pirate. It was great. It was absolutely amazing. Anyway, welcome back to the podcast, guys. My name is Merrick TV. As always, my go-to co-host below me, Cryptic Villain, good friend of mine that we met in an MMO, and then, of course, my beautiful, darling wife in the bottom right, who I also met in an MMO. And then, hopefully, behind her in the little box is our cat, who I also met in an MMO. No, I just that didn't happen. I wish that happened. That would be amazing. Okay, guys, so you know the drill. This is how we do this. We're going to be discussing a specific topic this week, and what we're going to be discussing is something that I talk a lot about when I'm streaming. You guys have heard me discuss some of this stuff. I'm really looking forward to delving deep into this week. That is class and build and boon diversity. And I think that also sort of speaks to like the Holy Trinity, right? Like basically how these things are run, how these different classes and builds come together, how boons are done, like how that ends up affecting the game and your experience playing the game. I think it makes a huge difference on whether or not you enjoy a game, and we'll delve into some of those differences soon. But it's pretty nuanced. So wait, your goatee co-host, Andushan? No, that's we need a Maricord emote with a mustache, please. No, this can't be like immortalized. This has to be a temporary thing that goes away forever, and that we don't talk about going. Going
you're
forward.
the one that wanted the mustache to begin with. Now that everybody else has finally joined you on board the mustache train, you can't back out.
Okay. So I agree with the first part of your statement, which is that this is technically my fault. I made a character in Lost Ark, and I made it with the handlebar mustache, and I was like, "This is sweet." And then everyone I saw in game was like, "Merrick, what? Why did you make your character like that?" I was like, "Dude, it's amazing. I'm gonna grow one in real life, and you guys are gonna be like, wow, that's amazing." And then you'll all be wrong, and I'll be right. What ended up happening was just a couple days go by, and this starts to grow, and it's scratchy and uncomfortable, and it like tickles my lip, and it scratches Judy's face. And I hate the way it looks, and so now I'm the one trying to get rid of it. And Judy's like, "No, you promised everyone you have to do it." So we'll see. We'll see how
I'm
long.
also curious. I'm curious what it's going to look like in the end.
She is. She's curious to see what it will look like in the end. I can already tell it's going to be terrible. So anyway, Azure, Andushan, Angie, No Point, ours. It's good to see you. I'm so glad all of our friends are here to chat with us. And in case you aren't familiar with the format, Cryptic Villain and I talk a lot. I talk the most. So we're going to be talking a lot, and Junie is going to be reading the chat and trying to field some of your questions into our discussion. So feel free to ask questions, post comments. One of us will interact with you. Obviously, the podcast stream numbers are small enough that we can really interact with you guys. So please shout out questions. It's totally cool. At the very end, if we haven't covered anything, we totally will. But don't forget, if you're not already in our Discord, we actually do set up a coffee break channel where we can let you know what the topic is going to be ahead of time, and you can participate with us in a discussion leading up to it every week in the Discord channel. So if you haven't already, go to discord.gg/Merrick TV. Come and join the conversation. Join the group of friends. We'd love to have you. All right, so I'm going to pass it on to Cryptic. Cryptic put together a very comprehensive list this week for the topic, so I'm going to let him. He's gonna kind of shot call this thing, quarterback this thing, as they say.
Yeah. All right. Well, the first play is a Hail Mary. No, so there's a lot to talk about with class and build diversity. It's again, with all of our coffee break topics, these should be like 5-part episodes and
Bro,
not.
you're right. Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of start. I kind of wanted to anchor this in Guild Wars 2 and then maybe spread from there. I don't know how much you and American Junie, are aware of the changes coming to raids and 10-man parties in Guild Wars 2.
You mean in terms of like spirits and banners and
Yes,
yeah.
and basically 5-man. Every buff and boon is going to be 5-man instead of
Mhm.
10-man.
Yep.
And of course, that has the community concerned for a lot of reasons. I think the biggest concern, though, is diversity, class diversity. Are we going to go back to mirror comp because every group needs the same things, right? Every five party group of the 10-man raid needs druid buffs, needs banners, needs alacrity, quickness, all the nice stuff. Might, and there, I mean, you can get might from anywhere, but those individual boons and the banners and stuff like that, or some of them are unique and you can only get from certain classes. We all want AP from renegades.
Mhm.
And instead of being able to do a nice 10-man party where you can, everybody gets access to most of the boons and buffs, and you're able to, people can bring different things that allow them to show off their own uniqueness with their class, but also still provide the boons that people are looking for. Now everybody may get pigeonholed into, we need 2 druids, we need 2 mirror chronomancers that are providing alacrity and quickness. We need 2 alacrigades, basically. We need 2 renegades all the time giving alacrity.
Right.
And that's 6 out of the 10 roles filled up with a mirror. And then whatever DPS is left. That's concerning. And I mean, I just wanted to get your guys' take on, first off, do you feel like that is going to take us back to mirror comp? And second off, what are the things that, on the note of diversity, what are the things that ArenaNet could do if they really want to push down this 5-man, boon direction to increase diversity? Because we may end up just losing some classes. Like, I think Tempest support is just dead after this, right?
I mean, that's a really good point. Basically forcing out supports that already had a hard time shoehorning their way into a composition that required fewer supports, right? Like now it's going to require more, or at least more hybridization. The first thing that I want to say is that what we're talking about is Guild Wars 2, and we're talking about boons. And I just want to say that boons or buffs that you would, I think Guild Wars 2 is the only game that calls them boons. I think most games call them buffs. But the way that buffs are done in every MMO is different. And until we got to Guild Wars 2, again, you guys have heard me say it before, but I've been playing basically every major MMO since EverQuest. And until I got to Guild Wars 2, I wouldn't have said that this is possible. But the way that Guild Wars 2 does it is that boons actually control the end game. They control the dynamic in which you are able to participate. Excuse me, coffee grounds. You're able to participate in end-game collaborative, cooperative content. What you can bring, what you can't bring, what is necessary, what becomes meta, what becomes obsolete, like how group composition can work, and then basically even where you stand and how you participate in a raid, right, is all in a stranglehold because of boons. This is a fascinating situation, right? Because in Guild Wars 2, I think that the game in general, I should just say, like, I think the game is amazing. I think the combat is phenomenal. I think raids are incredible, but it's all sort of messed up. It's diminished by the boon situation, right? Boons are a really big deal. Boons are something that you are continuously applying in Guild Wars 2, right? In World of Warcraft, which I think is like the big thing to compare to, right? Before a raid in World of Warcraft, there are class specific boons or buffs, and those are given out at the beginning of the raid. They are long lasting, half an hour long buffs. They don't have a range to which they can be activated, right? You just activate at the beginning of the raid, and wherever that guy goes, he's still got, power word fortitude or whatever. So Guild Wars 2 is already under this stranglehold based on the way that it does boons. First of all, every class in the game contributes the same pool of boons. In World of Warcraft, the priests would give power word fortitude, and then some other class would give some other buff that is unique to their class, and they would all be doing that. In Guild Wars 2, there's a list of like 12, 15 boons, right? And every class sort of draws from the same thing. It's not called something different. It's always called Aegis. Does this class give Aegis? Yes. This one give Aegis? No. But it is worth mentioning that Guild Wars 2 is incredibly unique in the way that they do boons with this sort of shared pool. And on top of that, they also provide them in a very short distance around the provider, right? It's always like PBAOE, player-based area of effect, and they're very short duration, right? So they have to be continually reapplied. This shapes the way that a raid works. They must have all of these boons. I would also say that boons, Cryptic, wouldn't you agree, that boons are also more significant in this game to your efficacy as a player than any other game? Like if you don't have quickness or alacrity or might, it's not like something you could just shrug off like, we don't have enough bloodlust in this
No,
raid. This is a
absolutely.
defining thing.
Absolutely, I agree. And I'm concerned. Part of my concern with the changes upcoming is that ArenaNet doesn't see it that way. They see boons like you just described in WoW, where if it's not there, it's not the end of the world. In Guild Wars 2, you can't do your rotation without quickness. I mean,
Exactly.
take quickness away and your rotation will just cease to function on most classes. So same with alacrity, obviously, but I mean, it's very concerning. And my big question going forward is going to be, how much diversity are the players going to be able to build into their comps? And if the players end up hitting a wall with that, like again, let's say Tempest support Tempest support just came back because it was given 10-man boons, right? That was the change that brought it back into relevancy.
Yeah, but what boons, right? Like might.
I'm not a support player.
It's not quickness or alacrity.
No, it's might and I forget the other one.
Regen.
Well, definitely regen.
Yeah,
some of the
probably the best regen, right? They have soothing mist and stuff. Like they've got really good regen. But I think it's basically vigor, regen, and
protection. I think
prot.
Yeah, I think it gives prot as well.
Maybe not even like a ton of prot, but you're right. Like it barely edged its way into the meta composition. Now, when we're discussing this, because of everything that I said a moment ago, with the way that boons sort of have a stranglehold on the way that a raid group will be able to be formed, it really defines the meta and what you're able to bring. Guild Wars 2 has also a very limited roster in its raid. It's only 10 people. So trying to fit in everything that the group needs is really dictated by what boons, right? Like everybody loves, I think Elementalist is a great example of this, because if you have a healer like a Tempest, this is probably one of the biggest healing output classes in the game. Probably some of the most on-demand heals, strongest heals, biggest, widest heals, easiest to play, easy access heals. So in terms of like an actual, let's bring the best healer we can, like Tempest would absolutely be in that list, but it is restricted or completely removed from the list of potential classes to be brought because of its lack of offensive boon contribution. So I just wanted to give like a framework for how much I think boons have a stranglehold on Guild Wars 2 in a really negative way. And now, obviously, there's no way to undo that. They did it to try to streamline, how boons work. But now with them trying to make this shift towards 5-man boon contribution. Yes, I'm a little nervous about mirror comp. I think that's what you brought up. But my thing is that back when mirror comp was a thing, the diversity of what builds could bring these various boons was way down, right? I mean, you think about when Cryptic says mirror comp, he's talking about the old days when Phalanx Strength Warrior was providing might, right? So you had like 2 druids, 2 warriors, and then it wasn't really, and 2 chronos, and then like a couple of DBS. And there was no way around that because there was only one quickness provider, only one alacrity provider, only one real might provider. And so it had to be a mirror. These days, if they force this and it ends up being 5-man for all this stuff, yes, I believe that it will shake up composition in a huge way and in a way that it's going to piss off a lot of people. But I don't think it will end up being a mirror. I think it'll end up being more diverse than that. The only thing that I'm concerned about is like banners
Druid
and
spirits.
spirits.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, like even in spirits, like you could do. There's so many popular spirit beast kinds of things nowadays. Like I believe that leaves room for a hybridized character to come in. Is he going to want to have to bring spirits? I don't know. And why would you have to bring two warriors to bring banner? I don't know. You're right. I think it's probably going to be pretty crappy, at least for a while.
He's thinking this through. He's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, there's some sides of it that I can relate to, and
Yeah.
again, I do think it's going to be bad. I just don't think it's going to be as bad as what we used to call mirror comp, which really was bad back then.
Yeah, I mean, I think that their idea was to. I think they're trying to lower. I'm sure there's multiple reasons they're trying to do this, but I think one of the things they're trying to do is lower the amount of DPS and some of the versatility you can bring on that front to a raid, and bring maybe a little more balance in the overall roles that are needed in the raid environment without actually tweaking mechanics and like adding more tanking mechanics and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're not going to go back and rework old raids.
Yeah,
We can't
they're
even
not
get them to
gonna-
go forward and make new raids.
Exactly,
It's never going to
exactly.
happen.
And obviously, a lot of this is with the idea of strikes going forward, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's their
Mhm.
big thought process. But I mean, we'll see. We'll see. I'm holding out hope, just like with everything with EOD. And I mean, I guess like if we were going to go forward and make a raid comp going forward and stuff like that, I think a lot of it is going to be, as Null Point was pointing out, a lot of it's going to be moving forward on the players to introduce diversity and bring their own things that they're working on instead of whatever the meta is going to be. And I know that's always kind of been the case, but I think it'll be even more so now. And I guess that leads us to the next question: is how much of build and buff diversity and class diversity should be on players to implement, or on the structure of a game? Like when we're talking about Ashes of Creation coming out and their new MMO.
Asses of creation. That's what they're called.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I wasn't going to let it slide. Sorry.
I thank you. I know. I'm glad you're on point, man. You really got it.
Good. I'm paying attention. It's a very different game, says No Point. We're not going to talk about that one. That's next week's podcast. In fact, that's a different podcast. That's just a whole different. That's a different channel. Subscribe to. Never mind. Anyway,
After Dark.
MTV After Dark. I think it's a very valid question, and I'll just speak from my own experience. I think that one of the reasons that I really gravitate in Guild Wars 2 and in other games, one of the reasons why I really gravitate towards being like a primarily DPS player, is that that's the most versatility, right? Like I'm not really expected to provide anything other than damage.
Mhm.
So I find the way to do damage in this class, and then I do it as best as I can. And if I can find like so you guys, some of you know me. I think what my stream became most popular for in Guild Wars 2 was basically taking less popular, less meta builds and trying to squeeze as much damage out of them as possible, and kind of surprising pugs, right? I'd go out into public pickup groups, and I would do like a lot of damage on a class that people said no damage could be done on, and they'd be like, what the heck is, it just kind of grabs some attention. But it's on me to decide what is going to be allowed in that level of versatility, right? I know if I practice enough, if I get good enough, it doesn't matter if that build is listed on Snowcrows, which is the meta raid site for all the builds. It doesn't matter if it's there or not. If I can do a certain amount of damage, then that's it, right? Like that's all I need to be able to bring. Whatever ArenaNet does in terms of balance, and I shouldn't limit this just to Guild Wars 2, but any MMO, as long as I'm doing a certain amount of damage because I put enough practice in, or I'm good enough at this build, I can bring it. It's not that ArenaNet decided that it can be brought because I was given a specific boon, right? So like that's the real issue. I wanted to play support. How many people wanted to play support scrapper in raids for a long time? And there's no way that it could be brought until it was given quickness. We knew that it was never going to be allowed in the greater meta until it was given quickness. Doesn't matter how good a healer you are, right? That's not the metric by which we're judging. It had to be this stranglehold based on boon contribution. So how much is it incumbent on the developers or the player to create that kind of diversity? I think the times that I've had the most fun in MMOs is when it's on me, when I sort of shoehorn extra diversity by putting in a ton of practice. So I like it when there's more diversity not less, but I do see some of what they're trying to address. Like, I know that everyone got really upset about Boon Thief, and they're like, why can't Boon Thief just be 10 man and cover every boon in the game for every fight in the game? And I actually think that that was a bad idea. I did not mind when they nerfed Boon Thief and made it 5 man.
Mhm.
So I can see both sides of it, but I really do like when I get to do something that is outside maybe what the developers intended at that exact moment, right? They shouldn't have full control over what is allowed to be brought and what isn't. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And also, I think Null Point kind of mentioned that too. Like, it's on the player, right, to be willing to have this diversity come in. And at the end of the day, for the vast majority of gamers, specifically in Guild Wars 2, you can clear bosses with not a meta comp. And if people can enjoy other classes and sometimes, in practical sense, an actual application, uh the application of being able to win a fight is different from the perfect meta, and it
Mhm.
always will be, and a lot of
Yep.
times the perfect meta just does not work for every group,
Well,
more
and
often than not.
you see in Guild Wars 2, at least, what happens when that meta is too strong, or if you're in a group that really is trying to accomplish the meta. I like that you brought up sort of the dichotomy between like what a group needs to be successful and have fun, or what a group needs to be meta. Those are two very different things, right? So, like, yeah, I can play my scrapper DPS and do just fine DPS, maybe even top DPS, and have a good time and get the win, because that's not going to make or break it. But if we're breaking records or going through tournaments, oftentimes what that means is that the group identifies whatever the very best DPS is for this boss, and then there's 6 of them. You know what I mean? It's 6 of the same thing. So I don't like it when it gets sort of broken down into that way. I
No,
like
that's
diversity.
No, that's fair. In my opinion, like when it comes to diversity with meta stuff, that has to kind of be enforced by the developers, right? Like if you're in an end game scenario, the developers have to provide the structure for the not only the balance around that, but then incentivizing diversity,
Yeah.
because you know win or whatever end game rating group is just going to take the best stuff regardless.
Mhm.
There's no reason not to, right? So building in diversity in that perspective has to be up to the developers. But for the rest of the game, I think it's a balancing act between what tools are provided to the community and how the community uses it. And I think, I mean, as far as we go in Guild Wars 2 right now, I feel like in Guild Wars I feel like we are kind of leaving. We're kind of leaving a relatively balanced state. I actually, like you, I agree with the change to Boon Thief. I think that was restricting diversity.
Mhm.
It sucks for the meta comps, but so I think we had entered a balanced state, and I think that we may be leaving that and becoming a more or less diverse state with the new 5-man boons. But we'll see. We'll see. I think as far as games coming up in the horizon and other MMOs that we have out there right now, I haven't seen with Lost Ark. I haven't been able to get into the end game yet.
Mhm.
But things like BDO and SOTOR and these other games, it's interesting because some of them really struggle with diversity because of a lack of the Holy Trinity. I feel like the Holy Trinity bakes in a lot of base diversity into end game kind of content,
Mhm.
um, and I think that it's tough for an MMO to incentivize diversity when supports and tanks aren't needed. I mean, we see that in Guild Wars 2. With a lot of content, you don't need a
Well,
tank, you don't need a support.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like in terms of Guild Wars 2, it's an even more nuanced discussion, right? Because do they have the Holy Trinity or don't they? Like
Hmm.
it's such a hybrid system
Hmm.
that it is very weird. Like, I guess there's tanks, I guess there's healers, but if it weren't for offensive boon contribution, would there even really be? Like, everybody can kind of handle their own healing, and tanking mechanic is forced for only some fights, for even like a small percentage of fights, right? Like, most things in Guild Wars 2 are not balanced around tanking. In fact, there's no rhyme or reason to the way in which aggro or threat is managed. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think ArenaNet even knows how it works. Like, there was all sorts of mystery back in the day. Like, is it because you're closest? Is there the highest toughness? It's because I did the most damage? Nobody knows. Not really. The only way that they are able to do it is by forcing that mechanic in some artificial way in a raid, which is, yes, it's the closest person or the farthest person, or it's random, or it's the guy who picked up this buff, or they had to force it because it isn't sort of intrinsically there. I just want to look at chat. Azure Rogue says, how do you feel about forced diversity for metacomps, though? Like in Final Fantasy 14, you get a bonus for each type of class you bring, so it incentivizes that. So you always want one melee, one physical range, one caster, and then the fourth DPS can be any of those as long as you don't class stack. So, okay, is that forced diversity or incentivized diversity? What is it that you actually lose if you break that rule? Junie, do you know, as our resident Final Fantasy player?
I actually don't know. I did not know you couldn't take multiple.
Well,
I mean, you can take
it
multiple
happens all the time,
classes,
right?
but
Every week when we get into a raid group, like Azure is forced to be a melee DPS for us. And I hear it every time. It's like, because I come in as a ranged DPS, and so the raid leader always goes, "Oh, Azure, you need to log on to your melee." So he says you get plus 1% to your main stat for each different class type. So it is an overall group buff, tangible efficacy improvement. So that's substantial. Is it at that point? Because what is it? 8 people in a raid. So I guess up to 8%. If you screw that up, I guess you lose up to 8%, right? So I think that more incentivizes rather than forces it. Although I guess when you end up in the meta, that just means that that's what everyone is going to expect from you joining any raid group. I like the idea. I like what they're trying to accomplish there. But if it is punished and it does feel like as a member of the community trying to raid, that's being forced everywhere, and you are asked to not play your favorite DPS build because freaking Cryptic Villain is always playing a ranged DPS, and now I have to play melee. I could see that being a bummer too. Like that is actually the game enforcing a certain kind of diversity in a way that I've not seen before. So that is interesting.
I'm curious how that plays out when you have like ranged DPS doing significantly, maybe not significantly, but 2-3% more damage than melee DPS when the meta shifts. I mean, so now all of a sudden ranged are 3 or 4% better than melee. Is it even worth that 1%? I don't play Final Fantasy, so I can't say, but is it even worth that 1% stat bonus?
Yeah, that probably varies. I think in general, melee DPS do more damage than ranged DPS, but ranged DPS, as you know from being a DPS in any game, are able to upkeep DPS in moments when a melee would not be able to. So it should balance itself out based on the phases and based on the fight mechanics, right? So it's going to be very different. But that's an excellent question, Azure. That's something that I've never seen before. I do like it, and Cryptic said this a moment ago, that it is technically incumbent upon the developers to insist on at least the possibility of diversity. If it is their responsible to look at their game, right, and see what the end game is looking like. And if the end game DPS is being dominated by a single class and nothing else is allowed, staff elementalist, which had that going for them for like 2 years. No one was allowed to bring anything but staff elementalists. Then yes, it's their responsibility to change it, right? It doesn't matter how good I get at playing some meme DPS to try to compete. It really should be them to go, hey, maybe something's out of whack there. So they need to make room for diversity, right? By either nerfing or buffing something within the same range. But forced diversity, I don't know. I don't think I like that. I think the only time I liked forced diversity being implemented in a video game was when they stopped allowing people to pick the same hero in Overwatch. So that everybody had to be a different hero. I thought that was a really good change, but in an MMO scene, you force people to play what they want.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, dude, no, that was it. Back to like 5 Genjis. It was so toxic. I didn't like that at all. And also it ruins some of the role play, right? These are like specific heroes that you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
But in terms of an MMO, we were talking about this last week, right, Cryptic? It's like we want choice. Above all else, right? Like, yeah, diversity is good, balance is good. all of these different elements that make a game, sitting correctly in endgame. All those things are good, but at the very end of the day, we don't want to be told we can't play what we want to play or how we want to play. So there has to be enough room for that.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, also based on some of the things said in chat, it seems that in Final Fantasy 14, the bonus you get really isn't like a make or break kind of situation. So I don't know how
Hmm.
enforced it is in meta endgame savage content or not, but it seems like it's not something that is game breaking in that sense.
So you get rewarded for pulling out that diversity. I mean, I was almost gonna say, like, would it be better to get some reward at the end of the raid, like you get like an extra bonus or something if you do that, but that would probably be even worse.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a tough one. I like what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I'd like that. I like the direction that they're trying to take it. Maybe that's not
Yeah,
the solution, but
yeah.
it's and 1% for each class. Like Azure was saying. I mean that does stack up. So,
And now
yeah.
is it that you don't get any bonus at all unless you accomplish the entire variety, or if you double up on one thing, you just get 1% less? Right? Like maybe your raid group would be okay with just losing 1%, so you and your buddy could both play machinist, Like maybe that would be okay.
I think you're hinting at something there.
Well, Azure and I both play machinist in a raid every single week. Or again, he's forced to not because I don't have another option. I
Mm,
only have my machinist, so poor Azure has to play something different.
wow. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway,
How
I
dare
wanted to
you?
touch on what Phoenix Uprising said. He said, "Yeah, the issue with Guild Wars 2 is that the boons are too potent to not want them in some capacity. Like once you do your rotation without quickness and alacrity, or once you do it with it, it feels bad without. So much so that I actually believe that contributes to a huge amount of toxicity that is experienced in Guild Wars 2 raids. Right? It almost doesn't matter. Like we said a moment ago, does it matter if you bring nothing but meta classes? No, right? Like you can bring whatever you want because technically Guild Wars 2 raids aren't that hard. You'll be able to accomplish any raid in the game with any build that you want to, including not having quickness and alacrity. So what that should do, if you think about it, right? Like that should make it so that people are more relaxed and people are like, you know what? We're all gamers. This is going to be easy. You play whatever you want and we're going to be great. But it doesn't matter how successful the overall raid is if you drop quickness or alacrity, it's these essential buffs, right? Or even might or whatever, any offensive boon contribution, if you drop that, your group is going to freak out, man. Like it generates a huge amount of toxicity. In fact, the only time that I ever get frustrated in raids, ever, no joke, like I don't need the win. I don't care if we down the boss. I really don't. I would rather have everyone have a good time. But the way that I have a good time is by practicing and honing my ability to do my rotation. And in terms of the boons in Guild Wars 2, they are too substantial, or they're too effective, right? They're too strong, too essential, that not only do you just do less damage, right? It's not like you just don't have a passive offensive buff, right? It actually affects the way in which you're able to perform your rotation or to play your character. So I don't care if we get the win, but I'm like, I can't do my rotation. This is pointless. It's not doing good. I don't get
Mhm.
to DPS race. I don't get to have fun because somebody is not doing as much quickness as they should. And that is like a really crappy dynamic. Don't you think that defines Guild Wars 2 rating? Like that's different than any other game.
I agree. I was actually thinking about this as well. So the changes that they made to conditions. I mean, they made a bunch of changes to conditions, but remember the big change to world bosses where conditions could stack way beyond what they used to be able to. So that bringing a condition build to a world boss fight actually became meaningful. What if they did something similar in raids where you know certain boons that were required, basically required, were provided at a based off of certain things that you did in a raid. So if you went and or in a, an upcoming strike, if you went and hit this gong that was on the wall every so often, that's a bad example, but something like that, the whole raid party or the whole strike party would get quickness and alacrity, and therefore you wouldn't have to bring it, and that would open up the comp to other things. And then they would have to find a way to make it so that things like protection or something like that would be needed in order so that you could still have supports in some capacity, and you wouldn't lose. You wouldn't just have healers and tanks. But things like that is what I'm talking about, is finding a way to make something that has basically become essential already provided in at least some capacity in a raid. Maybe not 100%, but some 50% or something like that, in order to give more options for things that people can bring into the raid, because it's another slot that is freed up, right?
Yeah, I see the goal. I see the goal there. I think it isn't super practical. I think they've sort of buried themselves in this hole. I don't think there's a real way to get out of that. They might be able to come up with like a specific raid boss where that might be true,
Mhm.
but in essence, what that sort of recreates is just the random fights that happen to allow for a boon thief, right? That's the way that we experienced that in the past.
That's
Like in
true.
this fight, boons are trivial, right?
Mhm.
That's it. That's all there is to it. The guy has to hit F1, done, right? That's all boons. We're good to go. We only need one of them. We don't even care about his DPS, right? He just hits that one button and we're good. So it trivializes boons for just those couple of fights. It's interesting. And for those of you who may not have as much experience in endgame Guild Wars 2, the experience of Guild Wars 2 is that rotations as a DPS player are challenging. They're very fast, very high APM, or actions per minute. You're doing a lot, and you're trying to upkeep all of this damage consistently while dealing with movement mechanics and all the things that add flavor to the combat system of Guild Wars 2. But for a lot of people who play support, they have a very similar rotation. It is not how it is when you come to another game like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or something like that, where as a healer, like I said before, you do your buffing before the fight, and then in the fight, your job is basically just to heal. And so the more damage people are taking, the more active and exciting and thrilling your role is. And the less damage they're taking, the less you have pressure on you. You can kind of slow down. In Final Fantasy, it's very much like that, right? It's not boon related. You're not doing all these consistent buffs throughout the fight. You're healing, and then in Final Fantasy, healers have the ability to do substantial damage. So if the group isn't taking a lot of damage, you're still doing a rotation that's never slowing down. You're just shifting to doing damage until people need healing, right? And so you need to make determinations about if you save mana to have the heals when people really need it, but otherwise you really can do both. In Guild Wars 2, a lot of builds feel like you're pushing buttons real fast. Like if you go to a chrono, um, it feels very active and you're pressing this whole rotation. It's still that you have a rotation, right? You're not just doing healing, you're doing a rotation to upkeep offensive boon contribution. This is literally baked into every build in the game. I can't imagine what the landscape of Guild Wars 2 raids would shape like if they did remove this, because upkeeping boons, because they're so point blank and because they're so short lasting, it is a full-time job to upkeep these, right? This is how you play your character. So it really does define the game, because no other MMO works like this. This is literally the only one. I've never come across a game that does this. And no one would think, you think it's the dodging or the movement or the fact that it is a non-resource cooldown based combat system that keeps things very quick, weapon swap, all this stuff that keeps it light, all these things that make Guild Wars 2 combat unique. I think none of that defines the combat system of Guild Wars 2. It's the freaking boon system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. My idea was hopefully to, with each encounter going forward, providing some ways to shuffle the party around. But I especially with encounters in the past, but even going forward, they may be in a hole that's just too deep for them to dig out of. It's kind of baked into the core of Guild Wars 2 at this point.
Yeah.
But I think moving on, we should probably hit on talking about DPS balance and should a support be able to do DPS in? I know it's a topic you like.
I have had debates about
Oh
this.
gosh, that's so tough.
Well, I tell you what, I'll disagree with whatever you say, and we can have a good.
Well, how about you go first? How about you and Junie both go first? I will just be quiet over here and drink my coffee.
I
okay?
would love to say something about that, because I've been thinking about it while playing Lost Ark. So I picked the Bard. It's the only support class in Lost Ark, pretty much, except for one Paladin. And I was confused and surprised when I noticed that I had pretty much no heal skills when I started off. I had one heal. And it
Mhm.
took forever. It was like on a charger, right? So it takes forever to get. And it was nice to be able to go through the game and actually kill things on my own. I certainly don't feel gimped at all in Lost Ark from being a healer. That's not always the case in other games, right? You feel like you need to have a buddy in order to level up your healer. So that's definitely good. However, for end game content in Lost Ark, I'm not there yet. I don't know exactly what it's like, but I don't love the idea of having to deal DPS as a healer in endgame content. I don't like it. I think it's fine to have DPS skills when you're leveling, but for the actual end game, I think it detracts from the healer. I think it detracts from the uniqueness of the role. I think it detracts from its purpose. The encounters should be formed in such a way that healers should just be healing.
Mhm.
So that's okay. Cryptic, go.
Uh,
Sorry.
I mean, you can go if you want, buddy.
No, you go. You go.
I actually disagree. I think a healer's primary role should be healing. I think a tank's primary role should be tanking. And I don't think that any encounter should be built in a way that, I know this is sounding like I'm agreeing with Junie, but I am going to disagree. Give me a second. I don't think an encounter should be built in a way that enables a tank to primarily focus on DPS or enables a healer to primarily focus on DPS. I think that their primary roles should be those things. But I mean, some encounters get kind of boring. I don't think there's an issue with, and I know what you're going to say, Mark. You're going to say, oh, well, the encounter should be built better so that the healer doesn't get bored, so that the tank doesn't get bored. So they have
I haven't
things
said
to do.
anything.
I'm reading your mind, man. I know what you're going to say.
He is, by the way. That's what I'm saving up. But yeah, go ahead.
But I don't know. I think that it also provides a level of skill that can be weaved into a support's role, aside from providing buffs, aside from healing and tanking. Gives them something else to not necessarily brag about, but something else to master that, like take, for example, in Guild Wars 2, there are certain roles, certain mechanics that only a DPS can do. There's not that many. Obviously, we've kind of forced supports to do most of them. But there are a few like cannons, like you probably will send like a banner, a BS or something like that to go take care of that. He's basically a DPS. Yeah. He's basically a DPS at this point. So I feel like it's safe saying something like that. And that's a role that we've shuffled off to basically a DPS to handle. And I feel like that provides something for them to do. That provides an extra thing for them to master in the encounter that you could just give to a support, but it makes sense for the DPS to do that. And you can have the same kind of argument with giving supports some kind of damage role in the raid. Nothing significant, but something that allows them to show off a different mastery in their skill set and work on something else on the side, I guess, if that makes sense.
So, okay, so like coming at it from a frame of mind that is Guild Wars 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense to me. And you did sort of touch on it a second ago with me. You said that what I'm going to say is that, the fight should be balanced better to require a very active and enjoyable experience from the healer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it requires them to heal a ton and that is fulfilling. But like, what if we just accepted that it was true, right? Like Cryptic, what if fights in raids were balanced in a way that healing was so intense, that healing was something that you could flex. Good healing was something you could flex just as hard as really impressive DPS, that there were mechanics that were demanding that of you to be able to have to do mechanics and to heal at the same time that was super hard, that your kit as a healer was built in such a way that it felt as satisfying and fun and engaging and challenging, right? In a way that is comparable to DPS. Like if it was done that way, would you not say that would be awesome?
That would be awesome. First off, I'll say, just to keep in line with this theme of argument, you're wrong. I refuse to accept everything you're saying.
No, we're supposed to accept this as fact and then move forward.
No. I could accept that. I think the issue that I'm having is that present me with a case where that is true, even close to true in any MMO.
World of Warcraft. So
You
the
think
problem is you haven't played them. So
Okay,
World of
okay.
Warcraft is balanced in that way, or
Well, hold on,
has
hold
been
on.
for long swaths of
Let
time.
me change the way I said that. Present me a case where in any MMO, end game, high level end game content is the people, not the design people that are designing the content, but the players that are building the comps to go into that content. That their goal is not to reduce the amount of supports and tanks that are needed as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I would say World of Warcraft.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There's so like the way that raids were for the entire time that I was going through World of Warcraft, like this wasn't even like a topic because the healer builds were not capable of doing damage. The fights were mechanically heavy in a way that was really scary. Like, yes, of course, raids become trivialized over time, right? So, like, especially in World of Warcraft, we have to at least entertain the gear treadmill argument in terms of this because as you're doing raids, yes, they become easier, they become more trivial. Maybe that directly affects how sweaty you have to be as a healer, right?
Mhm.
So then maybe at that point you feel like you could get away with doing different things. But if we're balancing around the day that you walk into a raid, um, to me that was never a huge argument because first of all the builds weren't really capable of doing DPS, the
Mhm.
support builds. Second of all, that didn't even occur to you because you were resource managing, right? You wouldn't like you knew that you were going to have to heal and running out of mana. I think Highway Hero was the one that said he got flashbacks of shouting out of mana, right? Like that was you heard that shouted by your priest. That was basically like the siren song, right, for your raid. Like that's terrifying, right? So
Mhm.
your resource management was just as important as your ability to heal effectively based on the use of your skills. Overhealing. So not only were DPS meters a thing, and people would flex that, healing meters just as much of a thing and more nuanced because overhealing was a stat that was trackable. So like wasted heals, right? If you like bombed a heal on somebody that was full HP, that's overhealing. So there was just so much room to express your skill,
Mhm.
right? In the realm of support that got more attention than DPS, right? Somebody was like, "Oh, I know this bomb healer, right? Like this is what we want. This guy is awesome, right?" You don't hear that in Guild Wars 2. This is a whole different world that we're living in and trying to discuss two disparate systems. But when in Guild Wars 2, like yeah, you have people that are decent healers or even really good healers, but if the DPS are really good, they're just not taking damage to begin with, right? So you really have to find room for that. But in the olden days, or at least in other MMOs that are built around this, there was just so much self-expression to practice, to hone your skills, to flex your skills, to gain a reputation uh, as a support for supporty reasons. That for me, that's something that I miss. Like I have no, I don't get excited about playing like a hybridized, chrono and being like, guys, look, I did 12k DPS and provided quick. That's not super exciting to me. I would much rather be like the best healer ever. You ever been like a pure healer when shit's hitting the fan really bad and you're just saving the day left and right? Like at the end of a fight where you've done that and you're like, I am the reason we are alive because I just kicked butt. Like that is an awesome experience as a support, and we should
Yeah,
be encouraging that.
I feel like encounter design and player evolution kind of naturally goes against that though. Like the better your group is, SOTOR is the closest thing I've played to WoW. Take SOTOR. I've had those moments where I saved the entire raid with, or I saved the entire whatever encounter. I forget what they're called in SOTOR. It's been so long. Where with my heals, right? I put the right overtime heal on the tank, and I used the right instant heal on, this DPS that was about to die, and I used the right damage mitigation skill at the right time, and
Those are exciting
say,
moments.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're exciting
big
moments.
decisions you're making.
But I did that same encounter 5 times, and 2 times out of the 5 I had to do that, and the other 3 times I didn't have to do it because the players were better. The tank was better at holding aggro. The DPS was better at not standing in fire. What do I do then as a healer? I just stood there and I used half of my healing skills and the other half I didn't need to use. And I just kind of shot my pistol at the guy saying, man, I wish this pistol did more damage.
I definitely get that. And again, I think like
operations. Thank you, Andershon. Sorry.
Especially when we come from like our shared experience of Guild Wars 2, that's true. Because I think there's this mentality that is built into or baked into the experience of Guild Wars 2 raids that if you're doing every mechanic right, you're just not taking any damage. Like, and that's true of most of Guild Wars 2.
I think it's true of other. I know it's really true of MMO. It's the most true of Guild Wars 2.
Yeah,
like the most true. There's no arguing that. I mean, you can do in most of the raids without a healer and without really a tank, right? Like it's there's very few that you have to pinpoint and say. Basically, wing 5. It's like wing 5. You need some stuff. Everything else you can pretty much do fine. But even I think it's true in other MMOs to a lesser extent. I mean, I haven't played WoW to that level, so I can't say. But SOTOR comes to mind.
And I haven't played modern WoW either. So somebody, I think Flashy said like it current like Mythic Plus healers are expected to do DPS, etc. I'm not using WoW as like the example of today. My experience back then, I just felt like when that balance is working, right? Like Cryptic, your point is valid, which is that maybe it's a hard thing to maintain.
Yeah.
But when that balance is working that way, I think that's for me the best way. So like I would love to work towards systems of maintaining that rather than watering down the support experience. So that it just fits into DPS over time. Because that's a slippery slope, man. We see like Guild Wars 2 is the result of that slope, which to me, I think is not a good thing.
Well, I was just going to say like a lot of what's been put in chat is the idea that like DPS means you kill the boss faster. And so that's what this is all about. But in a way, shouldn't that be avoided? Shouldn't like the idea of killing a boss faster to skip encounter mechanics seems counterproductive. The game designers created these fights with these encounters. Us as the player base have figured out ways to break their encounters and not have to accomplish the mechanics they set out for us by putting an extreme amount of DPS out, let's say. Now, that can be fun. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but is there room for an encounter that cannot be out DPS'd if there was a way to do something like that?
I'm immediately thinking of Gorseval. Did that come to your mind? Like the first time my group ever was able to skip walls was super exciting, right? Like now it's trivial and it makes me feel like Gorseval sucks. In fact, we have trivialized 90% of fights in Guild Wars 2. If you're in a half decent group, mechanically there's almost nothing to do, right? If your DPS is that strong.
Well, I was actually thinking that maybe Junie hit on something there, where these mechanics that we're skipping because we're doing so much DPS, maybe instead of them not being skippable because by saying you can't out DPS it, maybe they are still skippable. You can't out DPS them to skip them, but maybe it's the supports that let you skip them by accomplishing task in the raid, so that they then have something to do regardless. Does that make sense? Like, because the evolution of a fight, of a encounter is going to be in the end game. Is at least with every modern MMO I can think, in the end game eventually it's going to get to the point where the healer and the tank's role are trivialized, where what they do is monotonous and the same thing over and over, and there isn't a obviously, if it's a new group that doesn't know what they're doing, of course they'll have the same issues. But any kind of experienced group, it will be the same thing for them over and over, and there isn't any kind of excitement. There isn't any kind of wow moment for them. Whereas the DPS players get that wow moment almost every time. It may not be the same level of excitement as when they first down the boss or anything like that, but they're looking at that meter and saying, I beat him. I did it. Or, the guy's like, man, I was so close. I just got to work on this rotation a little more. They get some thrill and excitement regardless. It may not be that same level of excitement, but it's
because
there.
In the end, aren't they doing the same thing over and over again too?
They are, but they're working towards a goal in their mind.
Right.
I think what it is they're working towards something that doesn't have a ceiling. That's what you mean, right?
Exactly. And so, I want to introduce mechanics and opportunities for supports to do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be DPS because they'll never compete with a DPS player. It's just not going to happen. But, if there was some kind of damage mitigation skill that they had to do at a certain time and that allowed the raid to skip an AoE wipe that would happen to them if the support didn't do it otherwise, or something like that, something consistent, not a one-time thing, something that allowed the support player to have to stay on his toes and kind of changed as it went along. I don't know. I'm just looking for something to give them to do because in the end, their role gets trivialized. I don't know.
And I, you know what it is? I'm going to go ahead and agree with you because I think it is really tough to maintain this. I think it's really hard to keep what I like going. And you're totally right. Like at the moment, it's impractical to expect it. I just like it better. Like, I actually don't think that solves the problem. I agree with you about the problem, right? I agree with you that eventually tanks and healers are going to have their experience trivialized. The only way to then undo that we've seen in other games is to participate in the treadmill, right? Then come out with harder content, even harder content, which pushes you at the bleeding edge, which pushes you to still have something so challenging that it requires that level from you. But when it becomes trivialized, like now I don't need to heal as much. So now I'm just going to like throw this pitiful, crappy DPS in the meantime. I don't think that solves the problem.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I agree with you that the problem is there and it's always going to be there unless we come up with something completely radically different. But the point I think where we've always disagreed on this is about the DPS, and I don't think that's I don't think we actually disagree.
No,
I think we agree that isn't really solving the problem, which is why you don't play support, right, Cryptic? Yes. Like that's not interesting. Maybe if you were like a total healing wizard badass and you're like throwing things out all over the place and it was such that everyone's turning their heads going, holy crap, look at that guy. He's way better than every other healer, which is the self-imposed ladder that is makes it always fun as a DPS, right? That's what you said. Like we just comparing to ourselves previous our previous skill levels or accomplishments or other people that were around our peers, like how good we are compared to them. Like that's what keeps a DPS player going. If as a healer, I don't think that adding DPS actually solves that issue. So I find that this is a really tough debate. I think that in the end, I still hold to my guns that I think that the best experience that we could reach for, like the thing that I feel like we should strive for, is where that's not necessary, where the healing is so engaging, or when the support is so much fun. And you're right, it's the burden of proof is on me, and it's hard because I can't come up with an example where this is successful. But all I can say is that if it were successful, if it were possible, we found a way to do it, that would be my preference.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also unfair of us to ask you for a solution. I mean, it's we're talking about something. I think we're all mostly in agreement, like something that we all want supports in the end to have things to do. And if we had the answer, I mean, we'd be working at some MMO company making an MMO.
Some MMO, hire me, please.
He doesn't have the answer yet, but he will.
But I'm working on it.
He's working on it. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, I think that is the holy. I think it's the holy grail. I would be playing support if that was the case, right? Like, I mean, that's why I enjoyed healing so much in SOTOR. It was the case for the time that I was, climbing up in SOTOR and learning the different operations. And then once I had done some of them, I was like, okay, I know what's going to happen. I know which skills to save and which ones to use. And I know how to conserve my, whatever the resource was for smugglers. I forget. It's been so long.
Smuggler resource.
I don't think it was mana.
Money? It's definitely not mana.
And Deshaun probably knows.
He probably does.
I miss SOTOR. It's been a long time. Very, very long time.
That's a good game, and a game that still holds on to the real Holy Trinity.
Yes, it does.
Which I think is really good.
Yes.
So Flashy just said, Meritus reminded me of a shaman I knew in World of Warcraft. The group I raided with during BFA was doing the last raid tier on normal, and this man solo healed one of the bosses like he was goals. So That's the experience that I mean, and that's the experience that I remember. I was a DPS back in the day, like in these early games, but like, did I form a reputation where everyone was like, "Holy crap, I want Merrick in my group. He's such a legend." No, like the supports were the ones who made that reputation, who made or broke a fight in the clutch way. And so the experience was so flipped back then. It was the support that got all the attention. They were the popular ones. Trust me.
But I'd like to point out that example right there in itself also alludes to the fact that encounter design and the progression of encounters is literally the antithesis of what we're hoping for with supports and tanks, because that example only happened because you wanted to fit in an extra DPS. And that's what happens in Guild Wars 2. The healers and the tanks, but mainly the healers, that we are like, that person is awesome. She is so good at healing.
Maybe he solo healed because the other healer died.
Oh, maybe.
Flashy, just say I'm right. Like, you haven't said yet. I'm just gonna expect you brought the mandatory number of healers, and everyone was like, "We're gonna wipe because the other healers died," and he was like, "No, I got this," and then you won.
I mean, in Guild Wars 2, though, those are the supports that stick out in our minds, though, right? Are the ones that, you know,
can solo heal.
Yeah, right. I mean, I know it's very commonplace now, but I mean, you know, the person that solos heal all throughout SH. I know that's common now too, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I mean, common as in like it happens, but it's certainly not in.
A bit of a technical difficulty there.
Did we ever solve that problem? We're gonna solve that problem. We went AFK in the chat.
Oh no.
I don't think that's like a commonly shared experience, right?
Mhm.
And I'll give an example, because just a little while ago, we put together a raid team in Guild Wars 2 to help someone accomplish something.
Mhm.
And I think the idea was that we would collect a bunch of gamers, right? Like people that are like really good, and then like wreck this whole thing that they needed and make it really easy and finished really quickly. But as so often happens when things like that are put together, and Cryptic, I know you and I have experienced this like a million times, you could take a bunch of real gamers, like a bunch of really pro DPS people, put them together, and it becomes sort of like a measuring contest. And then people are not really focused on mechanics or healing or getting things done. And even though there's a bunch of really strong DPS in the group, everything falls to crap.
Mhm.
And so we spent like a good hour just wiping and on like basic stuff, even though the group really was filled with decent players.
Mhm.
So much so that I was like, you know what? I'm going to get off DPS. I'm going to stop trying to flex like everybody else, and I'm going to play a support. Now, like, I'm pretty decent at support, right? Like, I don't like to, because I don't feel like it gets the same, it doesn't have the same ceiling for, for expressing the level of skill that I would like to express. It's a whole different game with different metrics. But I was like, I'm
I
going
think
to swap.
was
I
I in
found
this raid with you?
you might have been. So I tried to weasel my way into being a support without stepping on anyone's toes. And I was like, I will heal. And I worked my butt off. People were getting hit by all sorts of stuff. I was throwing out heals like crazy. It was way harder to keep everyone alive on support. Like I was sweatier as this support than I was on DPS by like a long shot. And we won, right? We're winning. Like we beat every boss after that I swapped to, and it was great. But then I had this experience where I was like, there's no meters, right? So I was
Mhm.
like, everyone look at me. Dude, I'm working so hard. Do you guys feel like the heals are better? The quickness is good, right? Like I got you. Did you see that time that I saved you? Like I find myself in that situation because people aren't immediately like, wow, look at that guy kicking butt. Like there's not as much reward as a healer,
Yeah.
even though I feel like they're working their butts off,
I
because
mean,
I
I noticed
definitely
you.
did. The what?
So, I noticed you. So.
Oh, thank you. Notice me, senpai.
I mean, the main reason I noticed was because you had swapped off DPS, so I got bored because there was no one in the race. But
No, we'll see. So there's the other side of it, right? Like that is how we as DPS have fun.
yeah.
I'll tell you right now, dude, when a new patch comes out, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but when a new patch comes out in Guild Wars 2 and Arc DPS is broken, I don't even
No,
feel like
yeah.
playing the
No.
game. I'm so built now around that dynamic. Like that's how I have fun. Even if no one is there, I like to see myself doing numbers. And when that's not there, and somebody like I have had it when someone's like, dude, a DPS bailed on our static. Can you please come and raid with us? I'm like, yes, of course. Yeah, I'll come help because I always do. By the way, if any of you guys ever need a fill in Guild Wars 2 for DPS, I'm your guy. Just PM me anytime. I'm happy to help. But and then I log in and they're like, oh, by the way, there's a patch today. You need to uninstall our DPS. It's not working. And I'm like, well, now I just want to go home. I don't want to fill anymore.
I've seen
And
this happen.
she's seen this happen. So like as DPS, we have a really weird experience of the game.
So
Like what makes it fun.
do you feel like just adding more metrics for supports to be recognized, like a heal meter, aggro meter, things like that, or damage mitigation meter would be enough? I honestly think that
It would help.
it would help. I honestly think that like encounters need to be reworked. I'm not just talking about Guild Wars 2. I mean entirely. Like the structure of how we do raids in general would need to be reworked to get the kind of system that you want in the end.
Well, okay. So here's a good experiment. Like you said damage mitigated,
Mhm.
right? Like it would be very easy to gauge a healer's healing based on the damage that the group takes, right? And I'll share an experience from you that I really desperately miss. Anyone in here in Guild Wars 2 long enough to remember not using DPS.report, but actually using Azure, help me out. I think we talked about it the other day. The other DPS uploading site that was called. Come on, chat. Don't leave me hanging. I know somebody out there knows. Radar. Yes,
Radar.
Azure. Thank you so
Oh,
much, dude.
yeah,
I knew
yeah.
Azure would help me out. Guild Wars 2 Radar was amazing because not only was it like this really awesome, beautiful graphic representation of how you did, but it had percentiles. You remember this cryptic? Not only would you see like, okay, like, yeah, I'm a good DPS. I trounced my group, right? I'm like way higher than second place DPS, but that didn't matter. I upload the log and then I get to see my percentile as my build versus every other person who's done that fight on my build. And so I see, like, I don't even need to be racing Cryptic. Like, if Radar was still around, Cryptic wouldn't care if I was still on DPS, right? He's like, I'm bored now. There's no fun. Like, I don't have anyone to race. But when there's metrics like that for you to compare yourself against, which Final Fantasy does like crazy, right? No point. That makes it a whole new level of fun, whether or not you're racing someone specific in the group that you're in.
And
Even
so-
if Cryptic beat me, I could go and look online and be like, dude, we're both 99th percentile. We freaking roll, right? Like there's that experience.
Yeah. So you think that putting that in for supports as well would provide them with a leaderboard to kind of compare themselves against, and give them like a competitive side to look at?
Absolutely. And I can say with confidence that would be true, because in a game like, I'm sorry to keep bringing up World of Warcraft. I've raided in World of Warcraft. I've barely raided in Final Fantasy. But in World of Warcraft, I can say that like you would flex those heal meters. And at the end of a big old raid with a ton of healers in the group, you don't think that all the healers are looking at the healing meters and looking at the overall overhealing, and then the officers are discussing afterwards like how good that healer was, and we're doing progression on the hard boss. Next time we want Merrick there, like his meters have been off the chart. Well, because I was never a healer, so no, you're right. But I was one of the officers who were sitting there talking about that, like, dude, No Prayer. I remember this guy named No Prayer. Like, this dude is an awesome heal. You've been looking at his meters lately. They've been getting really good. Like the same kinds of discussions that you have about DPS were had about healers. Now, how awesome is that? Is that not something to aspire to?
No, I think that's a really good, I don't want to say short term, like midterm fix, like something that could be implemented for games MMOs that already exist and that should be in MMOs going forward.
Thank you, No Point.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
What?
And I feel like every MMO, especially any MMO that has the Holy Trinity, should have that. I think that would solve a lot of the issues. I do still think that there's some underlying fundamentals that would need to be like, because we're talking about, I think we're kind of talking about two different problems that both contribute to the same thing, which is supports and tanks not having stuff to do as much as DPS. and providing them with a, basically like a Band-Aid, right? An alternative to shift their focus away from, because you said, you expressed yourself, the problem exists for DPS. We just have the race, the DPS race, the competition to distract us from that problem.
Right. This is not mechanical. It's self-imposed.
Exactly.
Right? That's the important part.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that is a good solution. And it's definitely something that should be in games going forward. I think MMO developers need to also still work on trying to reduce the monotony problem that comes along as, we go through different encounters and start doing the same thing over and over.
Well,
that's a whole other discussion.
And this is in a way too, but Highway Hero said, is the total focus on endgame leading to rating? Does it always lead to rating? Is that good? Is that not always the case?
That's a whole ass podcast by itself.
Yeah. We may tackle that next week.
No, yeah, I love the question, and I talk about this a lot, Highway. In fact, whether or not a game does that, chooses to do that, like defines the experience of the game, right? For the long run. In fact, I would say that's partly why Guild Wars 2 is the way that it is, because it has adopted such a casual player base, and it does that by basically not funneling people into high-end raid scene, right? And I've given this speech a lot, but I think it really highlights how this works. In Guild Wars 2, the very first worldwide disaster that you're faced with, right? It's this huge story, is the advance of the Elder Dragon Zaitan, right? He's coming to take over the world. He's really big and scary, and he's the big threat. Now, if I were to compare that to World of Warcraft, like let's bring up the one that everyone knows, like Wrath of the Lich King with Arthas, right, from Warcraft 3. Arthas comes from Northrend and threatens to take over the world with a Scourge, right? These are both happening as you're leveling up through your character or going through the expansion. You're experiencing the story, the peripheral stuff, the like changes of the world based on this and little mini challenges. But at the end, right, in World of Warcraft, if you want, like, you can do this whole expansion, but if you want the finale of that story, if you want to kill Arthas, defeat him and see what happens, the closure of that story, it is in raids. Not only in raids, behind the hardest raid. This is something that not everybody gets to experience. And so the game very naturally funnels you into raiding. In fact, way more so nowadays in modern WoW than it did even during Wrath of the Lich King. So like modern raids, like dungeons funnel you into harder dungeons, which funnel you into easier raids and pickup raids, the LFR system, and then into raiding, and then harder raiding, and then harder raiding. This is expected of 99% of its players. When it comes out with new content, it's locked behind raids. The coolest gear, the coolest story, the coolest experience at endgame that makes you feel like that big bad hero, right? That comes from raiding. In Guild Wars 2, you defeat Zaitan at the end of 80 levels of storytelling in a single player story instance. And then it's done. And that's true of everything, right? And there's no big bad boss. There's no story. There's no anything substantial locked behind raids, and that defines the player base. The entire player base of World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2 are so distinctly different, and I think that it is like in a large part due to that dichotomy.
I do wonder how different Guild Wars 2 would end up being if Zaitan was behind a raid encounter from the get-go.
Doesn't it make you wonder?
Yeah. I mean, I think the game would be significantly different. But I think we should probably move on. And
that's a whole podcast.
I know, that is a whole podcast.
That's 2 hours right there. Let's go. Just kidding.
No, it's good to know. We should write these down in the Coffee Break channel in the Discord so that we can start planning these for future weeks.
Yeah, guys, if you ever have any suggestions on the Coffee Break topics, please come join the Discord, post it in the dedicated Coffee Break channel. We will discuss it. We will interact with you. We would love that.
Yep, Merrick hit the nail on the head there. But something that I've always wondered that Guild Wars 2 actually I think handles terribly, or maybe handles greatly, it depends on your point of view.
Toxic.
Is racial skills. So, at Guild Wars, we have a bunch of
racist.
Okay. I'm specious, all right?
Specious.
Let's back it up a bit, all right?
Racial skills. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
We have a lot of different racial skills in Guild Wars 2, and almost all of them are pointless, right? They're all completely useless
Flavor.
unless you're flavor. Unless you're
Yep.
RPing, there is no point for them. Should that be the case? Is that
Mm.
hurting diversity? I've
Woo.
personally always felt like it was. I mean, I don't want anything that's so overpowered
That
that you
you're
have to
forced to
play.
play.
Yeah, you don't want to be
Yep.
forced to play a char for some stupid Charzuka. But
Hey, the Chazuka is usable by my Asura. Okay,
okay.
it just sticks halfway in the ground while it's on my back.
But I mean, I would like racial skills to be useful and to provide, a new, diverse thing. Wouldn't you love to see a Char coming into your raid and using the Charzuka? Like, wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be?
Or a Norn changing forms into a big, tiger dude.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I know for sure that I tend to be on like the less popular side of a lot of these debates. But I really, really feel strongly about this one. I feel like racial skills are such a cool and unique way of expressing character individuality, right? And we touched on this last week about how important character individuality is. And to me, it is of the utmost importance. And there are games that have done this really well. There are games that have done it really poorly. I think that World of Warcraft has classically done it really well. Some skills are very significant, but more so for PvP, right? There's some that are significant for PvE. There are some that are significant in a way that is not PvP or PvE. But like, I'll give you an example. Humans build faction easier, right? Like they're more neutral and they level up faction easier. So like that's not an advantage in a raid, right? It's not an advantage killing another player, but you get to spend less time grinding for faction because you're a human. And like, let's talk about ESO, where people there's a lot of people who love being the cat people, right? They're really
Khajiit.
enthusiastic about being them. They really love that. Or Lalafels in Final Fantasy 14. There are some crazy tiny people out there that are very enthusiastic about Lalafels. Now I think it would be freaking awesome to express that in some way, right? Like you have this cool racial identity. You love being a Sylvari, right? And in Guild Wars 2, it sucks because they actually give it to you. It's there, but they're balanced so poorly that you don't get to express yourself with them. But they're there, like it's almost worse. But then I'll show you the opposite before I pass it off to you, Cryptic. But the opposite is in fact ESO. ESO had the racials were too strong. They were too significant, so much so that ESO in the middle of its life cycle, right, just a couple of years ago, wiped all the racials like that, made them way crappier, and then gave every single person in the game free race change tokens.
Wow.
Because it was that significant. This is a huge thing. Khajiit this one thinks he means Khajiit. Yes, thank you, Anishan. I love Khajiit. And I was a Khajiit, and I loved that I wanted to be a Khajiit rogue, right? Or whatever it's called, Nightblade. I wanted to be that anyway. Yeah. But in addition to wanting to be one, I got to be like, and I got these sweet racials that help me stealth better, and they're better for stabbing you in the back. You know what I mean? Like it was just cool. Yeah. But then I guess if somebody else was like, I freaking hate Khajiit. I'm allergic to cats. I don't want anything to do with this. I hate the way they talk. I just want to be, an orc. And I think an orc should be able to be as good as a
stealth as a
Khajiit. Yeah, I know. I think that's ridiculous. Like that's just the essence. And I'm always harping on this.
No.
But it's the essence of what we're trying to achieve, which is as close to a Dungeons and Dragons tabletop experience as we can get in a game. And that comes from decisions. And so decisions mean benefit and loss, and judging that based on what you want to decide. Maybe you're like, I want to roleplay as a big fat bumbling orc trying to stealth laughably, but then I hit you in the head with a hammer instead of a dagger. Like that should just be a choice, and it should mean something.
Yeah, I think it should. And I mean, we see that in other. I think we see that in other. I was going to say like STO, and then STO reminded me that it actually has a bad version of that, where if you play an alien, you get an extra trait slot, which feels really bad.
What I thought he said unless you were an alien, you got one. Or
as an alien, you get a trait slot.
Oh, you
every
do?
other one, yes. So everyone else that's not an alien.
I'm an alien.
Yeah, you're the worst. I mean, we all know you're the Borg, so we need to.
Resistance is futile.
He admits it. No, I mean that's really. I think that's an example of where it's. It's funny. STO is an example of where it's done well and poorly, because the alien is the one thing that I feel is done poorly there. All the other traits throughout SDO are kind of interesting. Like you get the inspiring leader as a human, things like that. Those are those are interesting, relatively well balanced traits. But getting a whole extra trait slot as an alien is just overpowered. And it, obviously, like No Point was saying, it's a very fine line, and it's tough to balance. You don't want to make people feel bad, but at the same time, you want to give people choice. I think that you talk about Dungeons and Dragons. I think the choice is slightly more important than the than making people feel bad, than not pleasing everyone. Basically, I'd rather have the lore and the structure in the game and focus more on balance a little bit. I think we might have lost Junie.
Junie.
I think the main focus should be on balancing. Like if these skills don't have to be the strongest skills in the game. If the seed pod turrets in Guild Wars 2 just did respectable damage to what like let's say the NG turret, right? Like the NG, which does terrible damage, but if it did damage like the NG turret, and I mean obviously
wait, I thought you take rifle.
You take it for the thing. I know rifle turret. You take it for the action skill, the toolbar.
Oh, the tool belt skill.
Yeah, okay, but if you combined those two damage into Seed Pod, you could see a Sylvari taking that, right? Like that could be something that would be something that they would use. I think that what these companies need to do is balance their game around not having racial skills. Design the racial skills to be fun, flavorful, things that are in the game that people want to play because they're flavor and, they bring something unique and special to your race that's why one of the reasons why you picked that race. And then bring them up throughout the game's, first couple of patches and stuff, bring them up to be on par, always, on par at worst, a little bit behind the non-racial skills. So that way, people don't, somebody's not going to feel bad about running this, but they can still have their Norn Bear, running into the raid, and they may be doing 1%, 2% less damage, but that's not why they're playing that. They're playing it for the flavor, and you don't want to exclude someone from playing it entirely because it just doesn't do the damage that is, you're just, we can't have this guy in a raid because he's playing a Norn Bear.
Yeah, that noob, the Norn Bear guy. Would you be opposed to it doing 1 or 2% more damage if it was very little, but it actually ended up doing a little bit more damage? Would that break it for you?
Is it 1 or 2% more damage in every raid? Like if they become the best DPS because of this? Norn are now suddenly the best DPS because they can turn into a bear.
It wouldn't make it by, like, let's use Guild Wars 2 as an example. Like if because it wouldn't by default make them the best DPS. That might give them 1 or 2% more of other people in the exact same build on the exact same fight. Or like in a golem scenario in the exact same build, just different races.
I'm fine with that. I especially in Guild Wars 2 because it's so easy to roll into an ult, right? Like especially if you really want that 1 or 2%. It's Guild Wars 2 really shouldn't care about this kind of thing because it's so easy.
Yeah.
But no, I'm fine with that. My concern, and I think I would hope most people's concern, is that Norn becomes the best class for DPS entirely. Like their elite skill, every class replaces their elite skill with turning into a bear because it does so much damage. So it doesn't matter if you're an NG, screw Prime Light Beam, bear.
Prime Light Bear. Exactly. Just watches laser bears.
Forget if you're a thief. I mean, they don't use Dagger Storm, but no more Dagger Storm now. Bear.
So like let's look at if we were to stretch this out to its worst possible case scenario, right? Like say you're right, it makes them the best DPS in the game by 2%, and now every DPS, no matter what class they are, should be a Norn if they want to be the absolute. They should be a bear in order to do the best possible DPS. That would mean that the wins of Guild Wars 2, right? Win is a guild in Guild Wars 2. Like that group it's going to be nothing but Norn because they care about that 1 or 2% per DPS class. It, to me, that doesn't hurt me at all. I don't care. First of all, that's 1%, maybe 2% of total players, right, that are going to experience that level of caring. Second of all, they already do that, right? Like we talked about it earlier. They identified the one thing, whatever that thing is, that's the very best, and everyone has to be that no matter what, because they care about that tiny little bit. For me, I wouldn't care. To me personally, personal expression of like the uniqueness of my character, making a choice at character creation that gives me something that is additionally unique to me based on my choices than you, even if we both decide we're going to be warriors and you make different choices than I do when we're making our warrior, and then we both end up in the game, and because of some of the choices we are using some different skills or having some sort of different outcome, experience the world in some different way at all based on character creation choices. I mean, that is the essence to me of D&D, right? And I think that we water ourselves down so much in modern gaming in the name of balance, that being like the only way to really balance everything is to water everything down to be as simple as possible. And in my opinion, that's something that we've been seeing in MMOs for a long time. Guild Wars 2 is a very distilled version of an MMO. There's fewer skills on our bar than almost any other MMO to date, right? All of them are, or 99% of them are like damage based skills. I talk about this all the time, that there's so many other skills in other games that a class has access to that allows them to experience the world in a different way, not just combat in a different way. And like trying to balance everything so closely, I think that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think that even if we achieve perfect balance, we will have lost too much.
Let me ask you something. If swapping wasn't so easy in Guild Wars 2, I'm not saying it was hard, but it was like harder to get an alt than it currently is, where I can instantly make one. And me and you were raiding, and I beat you by 2%, and I was Norn Bear, and you were just an Asura, doing your little NG thing. You're throwing your grenades.
Prime Light Bear.
Yeah, prime. Would you then feel bad because you lost in a DPS race to the bear instead of because of skill?
That's a valid question for probably anyone but me. Because you know me, I do it all the time. Like ECSU is going to squeak out a huge advantage over my PVM Hollowsmith in a lot of fights, and I'm not going to do it. So if I lose,
not every fight, but
but in a lot of fights, and that's just one example, right? There's a ton of examples.
There are.
And I pick classes that are like intentionally dumbed down classes is what I pick because of the uniqueness of it, right? So for me, if I lose by a few percent because of a choice that I made to be more unique, then I feel less bad about losing. And then if I win, I feel even better about winning because I have made those choices. So for most people, yeah, I believe they would probably care. For me, I go out of my way to try to choose things that make me unique. And I am fully pleased with the ups and downs of the ramifications of those choices.
Okay, here's the reverse of that question.
Bless you, Judy.
Thank you.
Would you feel bad that you would no longer want to play bear form? Like if you went into a raid right now as bear, okay?
Yeah.
You would be the most unique person ever in a raid. Like
I'm about to make this build, by the way.
They would ban you.
Nobody's
gonna invite you to a raid.
No, they will. They will. I just have to be that good that they will.
Okay, sure. But it like racial skills we've seen in ESO. I mean, it was every build had suggested you should go this race for this build because you're going to get X, Y, and Z. I mean, I didn't raid in those days in ESO, but when I was looking at builds to make my character, I would see, okay, I should go this race, and I wouldn't pick that race because I wanted to be the race I wanted to be. But still, I mean, we see how that takes over a meta. Would you no longer be interested in would that then kill the novelty of it for you? Like, like you were talking about D&D, the novelty's there because there's only 5 or 6 of you in a party, and there's so many options, and they all provide something unique. But that novelty may be gone when we're talking about millions of people in an MMO, and now it's the best thing.
See, and Guild Wars 2 again is very strange because most of us, 99% of us, are playing these cookie cutter builds anyway, right?
Yeah.
So and I do it all the time where I make a slight change. Like an example is my Reaper. I don't use the cookie cutter build that the Reaper uses on Snowcrows. I like the choice, and I like to intentionally sort of thumb my nose at the meta or insist upon a choice, even if it ends up making it less good. What I want is so much choice and so much variety that everyone can make different choices and have different different pluses and minuses.
Okay.
And I really want to, I want to respond to what Andishan said. He says, Merrick TV, we come from different generation of MMO. Back then, there was a lot more player agency because things weren't really balanced. MMOs were very niche and not looking for wide appeal. As MMOs balance or became more mainstream and wanted to reach a larger audience, that agency had to be removed in lieu of fairness and balance. In a lot of ways, I do agree with that, and I think World of Warcraft forced the MMO genre into like the mainstream water cooler game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like people would go to the water cooler at work and be like, "Holy crap, you play World of Warcraft!" Like it was an insane thing. Before that, it really wasn't. It wasn't a thing. I feel like, to answer your question, I think yes, it did that, and also in way more ways than just the balance element that we're talking about now. That actually bleeds heavily into the discussion of casual, right? That the game has to be not class balance, but like accomplishment balance, had to leave room for the most casual MMO player, right? Because it was trying to be as wide appeal as possible. Like back in EverQuest and like the kinds of games that we played in the beginning, you really had to invest a lot if you wanted to be very competitive at the high end. But that changed the feel of being bleeding edge and high end. You didn't expect it. Not everyone expected that of an experience playing an MMO because it just wasn't really feasible for everybody. But now the most MMOs have to cater to the most casual player. I've got 1 hour to play every day, and I want that 1 hour to be meaningful, and I want it to progress to something epic. I want my 1 hour a day to progress my character experience in a way that I get to experience that everything Cryptic has experienced. It'll just take me a little longer to get there, even though Cryptic plays hours and hours and hours every day. Like that's what modern MMOs, especially Guild Wars 2, are trying to accomplish. And there's positives and negatives to that. And if you want this old guy's opinion, I think bigger negatives than positives. I think that we have more people playing MMOs than ever before, and yet the genre is more stagnant and less successful than it has been in the past. So like it depends on what metric by which you are judging the genre, but I think that it is actually this weird combination of both the most successful it's ever been and going straight downhill at the same time.
Well, I mean, I think that success and downhill perspective is, the MMO, the genre of MMOs as we see it is changing from what we used to know it as. I mean, EVE Online is the definition of slow progression that you can't just instantly catch up to someone else that's been playing for years.
Right.
But that shift is happening, and we're seeing MMOs become more popular, not just because people playing games are becoming greater. That's obviously part of it, but because MMOs are becoming more mainstream. I mean, pseudo MMOs are so popular because they're blurring the lines between what an MMO is and what a normal game is. And so MMOs are becoming more popular, games like Lost Ark and stuff like that, because they are taking away some of that time sink that's required, some of those elements that you were talking about that really maybe endears the wrong word, but well, I guess it is the right word, endeared you to the old school MMOs that you're talking about, that we just see just don't exist anymore, just are going away. I mean, WoW is.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say WoW's declining. I mean, nobody, not nobody, but not many people play EverQuest anymore. I mean,
hey, whoa!
EVE Online,
EverQuest community rise up, bro.
Okay.
Did you hear this?
Well, I mean, I'd like to mention something of what you said, where the fact that having alt characters and having that diversity, or just having that one character, And I don't really know if there's really a solution for this because, like you said, everything is about being able to make every single character now. And personally, I feel that desire to make like one of each character. But I think, if it was forced upon you to only choose one character, I think it would be a better experience overall, even though I cringe saying that because I'm like, "Oh, no, but I wanna be able to
Can
try
you
that
hear
other
the sound
character."
of everyone typing angrily in the chat
Yes,
right now? Because I
yes,
can.
and I feel it too. I definitely see both sides, but there is a certain like, "Oh god, I gotta anxiety, I have to get every character, I have to get every name perfect, I have to accomplish all these things," and, like, OCD kicks in and all of that. But if you're really just forced to play one character, that becomes your identity, that becomes what you do, it's special to you, and there's a certain letting go, right? Letting go of your friend gets to play something else and you get to do this and somebody else gets to take that and you can kind of appreciate that diversity because I think there is something special about that. Does it have a place in modern MMOs? I don't know, maybe not, maybe we've gone too far. I do like, and Lost Ark certainly allows for alts and promotes them, but, things like Lost Ark are breaking the mold in other ways, which is interesting.
Well, we're talking about like being unique, right? And we all enter into these sort of fantasy worlds trying to be unique. I think that everybody feels that way. We like to customize our character. We like to make choices. We want our choices to matter. All these things are definitely there, and it used to be created in a way like Junie was just touching on right there, that alting was not so easy. So your expression of your character was very unique. There weren't so like not everyone had every class. You know what I mean? Like you were kind of rare in that way. So I that's kind of from the era that I'm from, and I can appreciate that. Cryptic, I think you were sort of talking about how it. You brought up an interesting point in that it's also about how somebody catches up in a game, right?
Mhm.
Like you said that Eve is sort of impossible to do that, right? We're
No,
talking about like the casual
they've made changes to try to become more mainstream and giving people more catch up
in
mechanics,
opportunity.
but
Yeah,
I mean, the way it used to be, I mean, if you tried to join now, it's assuming the way the game, like let's take it back to it used to be. If you were to say, okay, I'm a new Eve player and I'm going to join, and I've been playing the game for 10 years and training skills that whole time, you would be so far behind me, like
yeah,
so far behind.
unable to catch up.
Yeah, it would be as long as I kept playing, you'd never catch up. It wouldn't be impossible for you to catch up.
Right. So that's an important aspect of how this works, and I think that every game sort of tackles that differently, right? So if you imagine Guild Wars 2, the way that Guild Wars 2 solved that, and this is actually a big selling point that I give for players all the time whenever I talk to them, and they're curious about trying Guild Wars 2. I'm like, dude, try it. Like the game's been out for forever, but you'll catch up in no time. And that's because the way they did it is they put the ceiling for how good you can be super low, and then they never raised it. Right? They keep adding more content, but it's at the same ceiling. That's it. So like it's very close from the ground to the ceiling because the ceiling is very short. You get to that really easily. World of Warcraft is the more classic way where the floor to a certain point, not the ceiling, but the floor to a certain level is very quick and easy. From that level to the ceiling is very hard. But once you get to that certain part, not the ceiling, but the certain part, then you could just sit there and by the time another expansion comes out, everyone is lifted to the new floor. And so then you get to go together up to the new ceiling. So that's the essence of a gear treadmill, right? That's the positive side of the negative thing that everyone hates is the gear treadmill. So different games tackle this differently. And so like, yeah, I would say that that's a big element on how accessible a game is. But before we move on, flying triangle, dude, I was freaking out, right, when you said that, because absolutely yes. He said, Merrick TV, with the type of individuality you want, would a game like Pantheon interest you? Now, Pantheon, Cryptic's about to make fun of me because I have been singing about Pantheon since the moment that Pantheon was ever mentioned. And I think the big meme is that it's never going to come out, right? The game is never going to be successful. And I am one of the, Azure says all three remaining EverQuest players will be very mad. And I, of course, am one of them. I come from EverQuest, and I think there's a void in modern MMOs for the type of player that enjoys that level of uniqueness, of challenge, of like individuality expression, of experiencing a world outside of just that of combat, right? Like the experience that you hear people talk about with EverQuest, it's so hard to recreate a lot of those experiences in modern MMOs, but Pantheon was specifically made by the guys that made EverQuest, and it's supposed to be this big dream for players who played a game like that back then, to see it kind of come back to the forefront of modern MMOs. Will it ever come out? I don't know.
No,
Probably
no,
not.
this game's never coming
I
out.
want it so bad, dude, but I doubt it. I doubt it.
No, that is never coming out.
Oh,
I
come
think
on.
it's less of a chance that it comes out than Star Citizen comes out.
Well, I want that to come out too.
I know, but I mean, I think that will eventually come out in some state. I don't think
Yeah,
that.
but not Pantheon.
No, no. I
So
think
sad.
you're better putting your money on Ashes of Creation. So
Oh, and I am. I'm putting all my money on that too. Andrew Johnson says, Mayor TV, the success and stagnation I feel comes from us as players don't know what we really want. We always say we want something new and refreshing, and as soon as we get it, we start complaining. Oh wait, we get it. We start comparing it to the things we're tired of playing and shoot it down. Yes, I agree with that completely. I think that back in the day, we used to complain about development companies, right? We would say like, oh, the MMO devs, they don't listen to their community. We're making our wishes known, our demands loud. Why have they not given us what we want? That was a whole era. It really was. There was like years and years of MMOs where the developers, they, like we complained about ArenaNet not talking enough with us, even though like they post all the time in forums and they interact on Reddit and they have a streamer program and they hop in people's streams and they stream on Twitch. Like in the olden days, they were like, they were the big arcane council that never came out. Like you had no idea what was going on. They didn't interact with people. And then they became a lot more interactive. And then we saw a whole other era of companies learning what it's like to listen to their community. Because I think you're right. I think that players often don't know what they want, or they think they know what they want and they're wrong. And I have seen companies go right downhill trying to appease all of the demands of the people who are the loudest. And that's not good either. So yes, Andy Sean, I wholeheartedly agree with you about that.
this is why every game needs a CSM, Council of Stellar Management, from Eve.
Oh my gosh. This Eve main.
Hey, I'm telling you, the CSM is the best thing to come out of Eve. I think. I wish other games would do it.
I mean, yeah, I can't speak to it. What he's talking about is this, that there literally is like a council of actual players who guide a lot of the changes in balance and direction that the game goes in. There's also something really cool in classic RuneScape. Anybody play classic RuneScape? Classic RuneScape is a game where they try to keep RuneScape, or the classic RuneScape servers, as close to it was way back in the olden days as possible. Now they still do balance and they'll still do changes, but anytime the developers try to implement any change at all, they have to post it on the forums, and it has to get like an overwhelming like 90% plus vote yes to allow the change to be made. So the community, as an overwhelming majority, has to agree on the direction of the change for the game. So because they're that dedicated to protecting the experience that they're trying to encapsulate in classic RuneScape. But it's fascinating. Like you give that much control to players, will they ruin the game or will they make it better? I mean, like I guess in some cases both. Just depends.
Yeah, and Azure, the CSM is still voted on by the community. It's basically, I forget how many people are on the CSM, but it's a group of players that are voted on each year. There's an actual, a vote where you submit they campaign, the players submit their ballots, then they're selected, and they don't have they have direct contact with the developers, and they get to basically they sign a NDA, which allows them to get access to information about the game and the development stuff that's coming up. way in advance of anything that players would have, so they can actually impact. When we get stuff as players, these things are already done, right? Like, the stuff that's coming out with EOD, a lot of that's already done. There's nothing. If we said, "Oh my God, this strike thing is the worst thing ever. Why are you guys doing this?" Just as an example, there's nothing that they could do at this point. It's too late. That's going to have to change months or a year down the line. There's nothing that we can do. But the CSM gets direct access and get to see development as it's happening, and then can influence that by taking things that would, wording things in a way that would not break NDA to the players. And, even without explaining them what's going on, they know the situation and they can talk to their players about, hey, if X, Y, and Z happened, what do you think? And kind of get some feedback on just how generally it would affect the game, and then bring that back to the developers and say, hey, and these people all play the game in Sun2, so they also have deep insight into the game. They're all people that are deeply connected to the game and the community. And
it's kind of like how people interact, like certain gaming companies will interact with their alpha team, right?
Yes.
Like alpha testers, I should say.
Yes.
Like certain games really treat that relationship with a lot of, importance, right? Like alpha is often by invite only, and then like the feedback that you give is actually considered, and like, the big open betas, you're just stress testing. That's what open beta is. But alpha testing, if you've never done anything like that, like you have the opportunity to write freaking essays, and they want you to, right? Because they want to hear what you've got to say. And that's a cool experience when it goes well.
I think the difference here is that because it's so public, because it's an election and stuff like that, it allows the CSM to hold the CCP, the development company, accountable, and it allows the players to hold the CSM accountable because they're elected, and it's not a like alpha testers, that's a job, right? So there is give and take there, whereas there is this is passion, right? This is a passion with a stepping stone of accountability. And there's not really a give and take. There's not a CSM member doesn't get an advantage by being a CSM member. He doesn't get paid. He gets a free flight to Iceland. That's about it.
That's cool. I want a free flight to Iceland.
That's cool.
Let's go. MTV meetup in Iceland.
No, but wouldn't that be cool if Guild Wars 2 had something like that, where like they had a vote and people could be elected? And obviously I would assume it'd be mostly streamers that would get elected, but imagine MTV, Mighty Teapot, people like that on council.
Did you put me in that same list? But yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay,
I'll take
not
it.
MTV, Junivision.
Yay, I'll take it.
Junivision, Mighty Teapot. Though having something like that, and being able to sign an NDA and then influence the game. I mean, I really do think that, raids and stuff like that would get more attention and more care. Don't you think? Like, I think that you guys could push the game and the development in a direction that would not make it, that would provide more interest to the entire community base and not just specific segments that, because developers are really good at paying attention to the largest majority of their community, and that's what provides them the money. They do that. Yeah. It's the smaller niche ones that kind of get left out to dry, and we see that with raids in Guild Wars 2. And EVE Online, the CSM does a really good job of presenting the smaller niche communities and saying these things need to be fixed. I mean, industry as a whole just got completely overhauled. The entire way industry works in EVE Online got overhauled like six or 7 months ago. And maybe a little more than that now. And the economy got an overhaul as well. And those are areas of the game that are definitely more niche. I mean, PvP is probably the biggest portion. PvP and alliances are the biggest portion of the game, and that's what usually gets the most attention. And to see a smaller area of it getting attention is, what the CSM is all about. So
it's a fascinating system. I think modern games are starting to see a little bit more of it as they have like their creator, like we're even seeing it in Guild Wars 2, right? They're being more interactive with their content creators, and I think they're taking more of the feedback that they're getting in that kind of direction. I think that ArenaNet in specific had a big crisis last year, and it shook things up a bunch. And so like they had a whole new team come in at the same time. I think the game has been out for a long time. People know how people feel about things, and now they're being a lot more open about the way that they're moving forward about things, which is great.
I think it's probably good. This is a topic for a whole nother podcast, but I have a question for both of you and everyone in chat. Two things. One, Do you think ArenaNet is working on another game right now? Okay, and it could be in conjunction with NCSoft because we're seeing behind the scenes. I wasn't aware of this. Phoenix was telling me this that more and more of the stuff with ArenaNet is being linked to NCSoft. I just assumed they were the publisher, but like even their job applications are now saying you will work for NCSoft and not ArenaNet. Um,
Well, I mean that's what happened last year, right?
yeah.
When NCSoft, obviously, whatever relationship they had with ArenaNet was it was one that put them in the position to come in and put the ban hammer down, right? So
Mhm.
they came in, shook things up, didn't like how money was being handled, their projects were being managed.
Mhm.
They fired like 80% of the development team, and everyone else had to come in. So obviously, whatever the relationship they had with NCSoft is such that they've always had that power. Do I think they're I mean, I think the general consensus is that they were working on another
Oh,
project.
definitely. Yeah.
And
Do
I
you think
think we
they
mentioned last week I wanted it
still
to be
are?
Dune.
I think it was.
Yeah, which is
I think that was one of
devastating
them.
to me that
Yeah.
that got shut down because like I said
Could you
last week, I
imagine
would
Guild
be.
Wars 2, but Dune? Oh
Yeah,
man.
dude, right? Man,
Yeah.
I would not be mad at all if all of my money was being spent on making Dune.
Yeah.
That would have been awesome. Do I think they're doing that now? No. I think that they have been, considering the amount of time that I think that they've been working on EOD, which I think is less time than a lot of other people think. I think they've put everything into this and are desperately trying new things to get people. It's funny, right? Because we sort of like give them a hard time a lot about not um doing like marketing, right, for
Mm.
their game. I think that's become like a pretty popular complaint about ArenaNet, that like Guild Wars 2 is this great game that nobody knows about or everyone forgot about, or that's the general consensus. If I come across a WoW player, Final Fantasy player, I'm like, dude, I play Guild Wars 2. They're like, hey, that game's still around. Like that is literally how that tends to go. Um, this time was not any different. I don't think they did any good publicizing for their expansion, but they are trying a lot of interesting things. They're much more transparent about the content behind. Like they've been showing everything, beta weekends, like all of this ahead stuff. I think they're trying new things, and I think this expansion is super important
Oh
to
yeah.
the long term of Guild Wars 2 and probably ArenaNet, because I think this is what they got going for them. I don't think they're working on anything new, and I think they're really hoping this goes well.
I
That's my
I
take.
I agree, and I don't know what Chad or Junie thinks, but I guess my second question to follow up with that would be, if EOD fails, what is the fate of ArenaNet? I think they get either swallowed up by NCSoft or their IPs get bought by another company.
Yeah,
What
that's a tough one because I mean, I guess a lot of people in the community would probably want it to sort of take the route of Guild Wars 1 and sort of be kept in a little microcosm for the people who still want to play it, but I don't know how that would
I
really
mean,
work. I mean, this
Guild Wars 1 is
expansion,
still around.
it is. So I can't
That's
imagine like
because
Guild Wars 2
ArenaNet's
just
still around.
disappearing. Um, I mean, I guess the next question on that is what's going to happen to Guild Wars 1 if Guild Wars 2 doesn't do very well. Uh,
Well, yeah, then it'll
Yeah,
probably go away.
yeah,
Guild Wars 2 even serves as like a funnel into Guild Wars 1 in a weird way.
it does. Yeah.
But for those of you who don't know, Guild Wars 1 is super old and is not receiving any updates per se, but about 5 years ago, they made a commitment where they restabilized, they moved to new fancier servers for Guild Wars 1, and with the promise of upkeeping it basically, you know, unendingly.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden the game got smoother, loaded faster, was more stable, and it was just going to be maintained. So they still do like the events throughout the year. Christmas comes, that kind of stuff, but they don't add any new content. It's been like that for a long time, and the game is, stable in the way that it is. I think that no amount of Guild Wars 2's new expansion succeeding or failing is going to stop a certain chunk of people, which I believe, like, let's look at the game in the last year, right? 1 year ago today, probably at Guild Wars 2's lowest point, right?
Mhm.
Would you agree that that's true? I would say that was probably their lowest point. That was when everyone became really aware of some of the misfortune behind the
Yeah.
scenes, some of the mismanagement behind the scenes,
Yeah. No,
where
I agree.
they lost a ton of people. There
Mhm.
was no expansion on the horizon. There was no, in fact, there was like these rumors going around that there would never be another tangible expansion. Hey, Dad, bad time to call.
Mhm.
So I think that was probably the lowest that it's ever been, and even still, I think that the way that the game is, they can and will maintain it at the level of success that it had. I think
Oh
that
yeah.
it'll just stop further expansions from ever happening. I think
Mhm.
that their ability to make living world chapters the way that they do is very manageable. And I think that even with the player base that they had at the lowest point, they'll be able to keep that going indefinitely. And I know that that wasn't your question about whether or not the game was going to be like was going to fold, but maybe that it would be bought.
Well,
I think
I
that
was less concerned about the game. I think the game will survive just
more like
because
ArenaNet.
yeah, more arena. I think the game will survive just because of the cash shop. I mean, any
Yeah.
game that has a cash shop that brings in money that can offset the cost of the servers and provide some kind of income will keep the game alive.
And Guild Wars 2 has always been good at that, right?
Yes,
Like
well,
they
yes,
have
that's why they've
somehow
survived.
yeah, and they've somehow managed to make it in a way where they come out with new flashy stuff all the time that people actively want, and yet have created a culture where no one resents that, right? Like
And
that's a rare thing, especially 10 years ago when the game came out. The like back then, spending real money on tangible in-game items
mhm.
was unheard of. It was like a really negative thing.
And
Um,
Phoenix was talking about this earlier in the chat that, again, it goes back to what Lazy Peon and Wooden Potatoes were both saying that this game does so many things really well. If only they did more of it. If only they did more of the cash up. I know that sounds bad, but they
yep.
do it in a way that nobody's upset about it. Why is there not player housing that I can buy things? Why
Whew.
is there not
You've heard my
skills?
speech.
Why is there not PoE skills in Path of Fire? The way Path of Fire does it with skills, you can buy cosmetics for skills. You can make skills look different
Oh,
ways.
you mean Path of Exile?
Sorry, Path of Exile. Why
Absolutely,
does
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I've said that 100 times.
Yeah.
Path of Exile style. So in case you guys don't know, the example I always give for this is that you can make a necromancer build in Path of Exile. Path of Exile is like Diablo, it's like top-down ARPG. One of the builds you can make is to be a necro, where you're like raising undead minions all over the place, right? So like that is a play style, but like a practical play style, but it's also an aesthetic and a role play vibe that you may not want. But you can go in the Path of Exile store and spend real money to buy something that augments your skill, not in a way that gives you any practical advantage, but instead augments your necromancer to no longer be raising undead shambling skeletons, but instead like alabaster statues, as if you were walking through a garden in Rome and all of the statues came to life. Or like what's the spell at the end of Harry Potter where she casts it and all of the statues around the
Oh,
school come to
yeah.
life? She's like, I've always wanted to cast this spell. Um and it changed, like you can spend that money. It doesn't give you any real tangible benefit, but it changes the way you experience your class. And oh my God, Cryptic is right. Like, what if you I mean,
Hollow Smith.
haven't you ever been pissed off as an Asura
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I was
engineer
gonna say.
where
Yep.
you summon a turret and it's
And
this
it's
hunk of
human
junk
turret.
from a
Yeah.
scrapyard,
Yeah.
man?
Yeah.
And you're not summoning Magitech cool,
Yep.
Asura tech stuff. Like we know what that aesthetic looks like. Why aren't there seed turrets, like skill
Yeah.
augmentations? Would you not spend money on that, Cryptic? I would just throw my credit card at it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Just throw
mean,
it.
they could do all this new stuff with Cantha. I mean, but I think that's what Phoenix was saying, that like this is another form of diversity. I think it's just a band-aid for the real diversity issue of class diversity and build diversity, but it's a really good band-aid, isn't it? Like it's a good way to provide players with a way to express themselves and have choices, maybe not impactful ones, but choices. And of course it would earn them more money. And the cash shop is their primary source of income, and it frustrates me so much that they don't capitalize on it more.
I'm surprised they didn't add player housing to this
Yeah.
expansion. It would have been a huge boon for them, and everybody would have been very excited about that.
It's insane. They added another guild hall with more guild customization, but not player housing. Like they obviously did that because they thought that there was something that people enjoyed with their guild halls. Why didn't they take that to the logical conclusion of player housing?
Especially, and I've said this before too, but especially for Guild Wars 2, right? Like not every game would love that. World of Warcraft players could probably care less about spending huge amount of hours decorating the table in the living room in their house. Like nobody cares about that. But in Guild Wars 2, this is the exact player base that would love it, right? What if I could kill Tequatl right? And get Tequaddle's head and like mount it on the wall, or take my legendary weapon that I crafted that I don't use anymore, and then like put it above the fireplace. And they come out with new stuff from the gem store all the time that allows you to buy and decorate your house.
Mhm.
We were doing this last week. We were taking the best example of games that do this, right? And this is a funny one to bring up because it isn't even the same payment model as Guild Wars 2, because Guild Wars 2 relies on their store, so even more reason why they should be doing this. But ESO is the best, right? Like, not only do they have the most ways, I think, to like customize the appearance and persona of your character in like a lot of ways that you can't do
Mhm.
in other games. And I've brought up personalities like a billion times. I think personalities are amazing, but they also have some of the coolest player housing I've ever seen. They come out with stuff in the store all the time. But if you go through the game itself and accomplish milestones in the game, you will get stuff from there that augments your character's persona in a unique way that is not practical or tangible. But you can also get like cool stuff for your house. So
Yep.
you could buy stuff from the store, or you could slay the giant dragon and get as into it as you want to. But in addition to that, you can actually pay for a sub in ESL if you wanted to. So like Guild Wars 2, it really feels like it doesn't capitalize on that, right? Like there's like a million things they
Yeah.
could do.
Yeah, and Anderson's talking about the concern about it making it too cash shop dependent. Like too many. One, I don't think that'd be an issue in Guild Wars 2 because there is no sub fee. And ESO does provide, you can get houses and items and stuff without buying in the cash shop. There
Yeah.
are quests and stuff that provide you with personalities and things like that. It's just a balancing act. And I think Guild Wars 2 is uniquely positioned to take advantage of that because there is no sub fee. So it would be even better than what ESO provides if they went into it.
There's definitely times where like I will open the gem store in Guild Wars 2 and be like, I haven't bought any gems or anything from the gem store in heck long. I'd be happy to support the game. There's nothing in the gem store that I want.
Yeah.
Like that happens, right?
Yep.
Like, hey, ArenaNet, like I would like to give you $15. And then I'd feel good about it. Like I'm contributing to the longevity of the game that I love, right?
Yep.
The game that I met my wife in. Like I always loved Guild Wars 2. I wanted to succeed. But, it does seem odd to me that there's going to be a limit. Like not only that, but sometimes I have to wait like 8 months for the item that I missed in the gem store to come back. And then I can't even give you money until you decide I can give you money.
It's true. And
for a game that relies on this, there's no way to subscribe. You'd think that it would be a little bit more.
Well, the big push that they did do with the cash shop in Guild Wars 2 a couple of years ago were those like random mount things and like all of that stuff. And that's not fun to buy. I don't really buy those things. I don't like that. I don't like gambling to get something that I might or might not want. Like it's just there's no point. However, I would spend maybe even the same amount of money as maybe someone else would throw at some boxes. I would spend it on items to put in a housing option, or like you said, to add like a cool new skill animation so that I can feel a little bit like more unique.
Heck yeah.
And this is obviously a topic for maybe the next episode, but this was talking
Housing?
about, well, not just housing, but it like the decisions that were made with EOD. That this was one of my concerns leading into it, is that we had people leave, some by choice, some by not choice, and then we had, particularly in leadership, a lot of those people come back. And while I love those people, and I think that they have played a large part in Guild Wars 2's success up to this point, I think that they're just going to try to repeat what has got them success in the past. And I feel like Guild Wars 2 has done enough of that. And for it to continue to be successful, we need outside the box thinking. So instead of more guild hall stuff, we need player housing, And that's not something that I think whatever groupthink scenario that they live in ArenaNet is only compounded and is not. I don't think I don't think what's been put in EOD is drastic enough of a change for what Guild Wars needs.
Well, it's interesting that you said that with like the group speak, right? Like, because we were, I think Anderson had mentioned about the fact that, the streamers who stream, let's say 8+ hours a day, like every day, and they're very much in that ArenaNet little circle, their experience is vastly different from the main player who's maybe only logging in for 30 minutes to an hour a day.
You don't think that they sort of like consider that their constituency, though. I feel like 90% of Guild Wars 2 is balanced for the super casual player. I would say that that was a big point of concern for me when EOD launched with its like big systems, right? Uh, Guild Wars 2 expansions have literally turned the game on its head every time that they've come out, right? Like HOT added verticality to an MMO in a way that has never been experienced before. Gliding and updrafts and the way that you experience the world was changed fundamentally because they added gliding and bouncy mushrooms and updrafts, right? Like the way that movement was enacted, but also the way in which you got to experience the world because of the 3D verticality that was added to zones was a fundamental change, not just for Guild Wars 2, but for MMOs in general. And then when POF came out, it was mounts, right? Oh man, did that radically redefine what it meant to say the word mount in an MMO. Like the joy of movement, I think is what someone said last week, and I really like that. It changed the way we experience an MMO fundamentally. Like mounts, go from Guild Wars 2 to any other game, and you're like, oh yeah, mounts are just, it basically just allows me to swim. Even a flying mount, right? I just get to swim. It's really no different. So like, it was so huge, and I actually watched like a TikTok a while ago. The dude was like, the experience of going through the expansions in Guild Wars 2 was like gliding. Oh my gosh, look at this, we're flying, kind of. And then like the next one was like mounts, like, oh my gosh, I feel like a fighter pilot, I'm doing all this stuff, and like, and now EOD's coming out, what are we doing? And it shows him on a boat and he's holding a fishing pole. He's like, oh, I guess we're fishing now. It's like, yes, that's cool, but I do feel like player housing could have been the thing, something bigger, something grander. And I don't mean to knock fishing. I like fishing.
I'm excited for the fishing. That is so true.
And I also, since we're just on the tail end of the housing discussion, I want to give credit to what Flying Triangle said. He said, whoa, ESO by default is the best because it's still alive. WildStar was the best to player housing IMO, and he's 100% correct. WildStar was not player housing. WildStar created like, you had like you built a little pocket dimension, right? Like it was more than the house, it was the environment. Like it was crazy. Guild Wars 2 had really solid housing because I love the way I think they revolutionized MMOs. The what?
You said Guild Wars 2 had really solid housing.
Sorry. EverQuest 2. EverQuest 2 had really solid housing. It sort of revolutionized the way that getting an item in place to get in the house, like the whole system was just really good. But there are games that did it really, really well. I just think that it's true that ESO is still out and still really expounding on this. But the graphically, right? Like ESO is so beautiful. The landscapes that they come up with, somehow I think that it's really captured a really cool magic in the way of player housing. But you're right. I wanted to give credit to WildStar because that was pretty intense.
Well, I think perhaps we should start wrapping this up.
What? It's only been 2 hours and 16 minutes.
I know. I would love to keep going. But
I'm surprised Judy has not yelled at us yet. To be honest.
Raz has climbed into his little cubby there, so I think that's the sign.
He's gone to sleep.
Yeah. He went out of his cubby and then went back into his cubby.
Can you guys see Raz, by the way, in the little cube?
There, he's right above the J in Judy Vision.
No, that's a real cat. It doesn't look like it. It looks like a stuffed animal.
Yeah. He's too big to be a real cat.
I know. Okay, so I guess we'll wrap things up. Obviously, there's never an end to any of these discussions. There are so many things to go through, and I really appreciate all of you guys for being a part of this discussion. That's what makes this so much fun. I hope that we didn't ignore too many messages. We try to interact with all of you guys, and if you have anything you want to follow up with, please join the Discord. Contribute your thoughts. We have a whole channel dedicated to this, and we'll probably do part 2s of everything we ever talk about because there's always an ever-changing landscape in this MMO world, right? There's always going to be something new coming out that'll bring up old topics. So I want to thank Cryptic Villain and Junivision, my co-hosts. As always, totally amazing. Check out Cryptic Villain and Junivision both on Twitch. They both stream. They're both awesome. Cryptic should stream more. I'm just going to throw all that out there. Oh, and yeah, there were some links dropped in the channel down below. We do have a YouTube channel. We upload all of these podcasts to our YouTube channel on a playlist. So if you missed the beginning of the podcast and you'd like to hear it, or previous podcasts, go back and check it out, because we're going to be uploading them all the time. Definitely join the Discord, because that's where all the action happens. We do a lot of stuff there. I'm guessing most of you guys are there already. So thank you for being part of our community. We love you. And also, we now have Ko-fi. I keep wanting to call it Ko-fi. But Ko-fi is basically the way in which, if you would like to support Junie and I, you'd like to support the podcast, that's the best way to do it. We got all sorts of cool stuff. Even if you don't plan on subscribing, I highly encourage you to click the link and look at the tiers. They're hilarious and awful and terrible, and I hate them. And Junie is a diabolical genius. But I would like to thank you both for being here with me, and we'll be back next Friday for the next episode. I'm going to pull this up. Did that work? Yes. Okay. So these are our Ko-fi supporters. We've got 2 of them. They're beautiful, amazing people. Thank you, Zhang and Art. In fact, you guys are great. We will be doing this every single Friday. So hopefully you guys will join us next week. Let your friends know. Try to spread the word. We're kind of small, trying to get going again. So hopefully you will continue to join us. We love you guys very much. We also have a content creator role in our Discord for other people in our community that like to stream or make stuff. So I like to try to raid them. I'm going to raid another one of our friends from our Discord community. So give me one sec.
Also, during this moment of silence, I would like to just remind everybody, tomorrow is Party Games Saturday. Party Games, we are still having them at starting at 9 p.m. So we'll be doing one of our special games at 9, and then of course, like, finishing off the night with things like Gartic Phone and Jackbox at 10 p.m. So definitely don't miss that. It's going to be super fun.
Everyone
tomorrow.
is welcome. Definitely
Yes.
come. All right, guys. Well, I love all of you. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. We love you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.